Alright, so we're ready for a test drive. It feels like we've been fixing one thing after another in this thing lately. I'm pretty sure every fluid except for maybe engine oil, and I probably shouldn't even say this, has leaked in this thing. Injector leaks, got those fixed. Transmission leak, got that fixed. Rear axle seals are leaking, got those fixed. So pretty much everything that could be leaking was leaking. So we're gonna go ahead and fire it up, maybe pull it out for a test drive, and see how things are running. But as I'm sitting here, I'm smelling diesel fuel, and I don't think I should be smelling diesel fuel, so something doesn't, are you kidding? Give me a, you gotta be kidding me. If it's not one thing after another. You ready? What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fabrication 101. It's great to have you guys back in the shop with me today. Unfortunately, if you haven't figured out, I found an issue with the Bronco, and it seems like lately that's all I've been doing is fixing little problems. And some of this stuff, you guys, as I mentioned in the last video, is things that happen when you have a fresh build or something brand new, or just major changes have been made. Some of these are not uncommon, but it just in the last few weeks, it seems like all I've been doing is fixing little issues. And some of them are, if they're not dealt with, could become major issues. Like my transmission leaking, puked probably 3 quarts of fluid out on the floor. I have a leaking brake line. I had leaking fuel injectors. And now I found about a 5 or 6 inch long crack in my fuel cell, which I'm super not happy about. So let me see if you guys can see this. So if you look, I don't know if you guys can see it, but let me see if I can. Oh yeah, maybe you can see that. See that? There's a crack right there. And it's leaking fuel. You can see down the front of the tank, and maybe across the top a little bit. I always thought my sending unit was leaking a little bit, and that's why I was kind of smelling fuel. But apparently my fuel cell is cracked, which I'm super disappointed about. So this is, whoa, still zoomed way in. So this is an RCI fuel cell off of Amazon, and I read through the reviews, and people were talking about them cracking and having issues with them. And usually when I've seen fuel cells crack, it's where mounting tabs are welded to the side of the tank, or where people have welded them in, and that's why I went with this kind of saddle style mount here, because I didn't want it to put any stress in kind of random places around the tank. The tank is sitting on, I think, 2, maybe 3 layers of like foam. It's the matting that you put in toolbox drawers, just so there's nothing rubbing on the bottom of the fuel cell. But as you can see, it's cracked along the weld seam, and what's frustrating is I don't know why it cracked. I don't know if it's a manufacturing defect. I don't know if it's something wrong with the way I've got it mounted. It does not look like there's a bunch of stress in the top of the tank. You can see it does have a little bit of a warp to it, but it had that when I got it out of the box. So, and it's probably mostly from when they welded the bungs in for the fuel fittings. So anyway, I guess we'll get this thing drained because it's still pretty much full, and it's a 19-gallon fuel cell. I guess we'll get it drained. I'll probably dump some of that fuel into my truck just so it's not going to waste. We'll pull it out, and then we'll go over some ways that you can, this is not something I like to do, welding fuel tanks. I've done it before. If you take your time, this is not something I would suggest, especially if you're not comfortable with this type of stuff or don't have a lot of experience doing it. I've welded up a few fuel cells before. It's always a little sketchy. This is diesel, so it's not as dangerous. But anytime you've welded on something that's held fuel or something flammable, there's precautions that you need to take. And those are what we're going to talk about today. So if you've ever wanted to know the process for fixing a fuel cell, we're going to cover that today. We'll pick this back up after I get it drained and probably after I go ahead and pull the fuel cell out of the Bronco.
A few moments later.
All right, got the tank out. It's all stripped and drained. I still got to wipe it down a little bit, but before I do that, you can see here's the crack. I don't know if you can see that very well. If I, yeah, you can see that crack. It runs, man, it's got to be from somewhere in here. It's got to be 6 or 8 inches long. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take this carbide burr with a corner, and I'm just going to try to kind of come into the center of the crack and kind of V it out a little bit. I don't want to get too carried away with this, but what I need to do is figure out where the ends of the cracks are, and then drill a little tiny, like a 1/16 hole right on the end of that crack to hopefully stop the crack from continuing after I do that. Once I've got that done, then I'll worry about cleaning it and trying to get all the fuel out of the crack. I've got a couple ideas on that, but let's go ahead and see if we can get this thing burred out. All right, so I got it pretty well burred out. So you guys can see the little tiny hole. I actually wanted to go with a smaller hole, but my drill wouldn't hold the drill bit, so I had to go with a little bit bigger one. Still, it's about a 1/16. I don't think it should be too much of a problem. What I'll do is I'll actually kind of light up just past it, and I may even come back and kind of burr that down some more. And then that way I can start my weld and weld all the way along there. So what I still need to clean this thing out and try to get all the fuel out of the inside of the crack, and that's going to be the worst part of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour some acetone in the tank, enough. I'm going to probably dump most of this in there just because I need to get enough in there. And then what I want to do is lay the tank on its side and hopefully have it drain out through the crack and not just through the holes. Maybe I'll try and stick a toothpick in those holes so it drains more out through the crack than out through the holes. The nice thing about acetone is it doesn't leave a lot of residue behind, which is why we like to use it for this kind of stuff. So, but when I try and get anything that doesn't belong there that's not just aluminum out of there before we try and weld it up. So let's go see if I can find some couple toothpicks, and then I'll pour some acetone in there. We'll lay it on its side. Ooh, there we go. All right, you can see the acetone. I didn't pour a ton in there, just enough to get a good layer in there. And if I tip the tank, you can see it pretty much running out of that crack. So I'm going to let it do that. And I'm going to go ahead and let it sit. The nice thing about the acetone is as it evaporates, it takes everything with it. So we'll get it cleaned. I got to run to the store, but I got to grab some lunch before I do that, and then we'll be right back. All right, so I just blew out the crack to try to get as much residual moisture out of there as possible. I went ahead and rinsed it out with the acetone. I've took it and hosed it out with some hot water. Now what I've done now is I've filled it up about 3/4 of the way with water. And I've done that for a couple reasons. One, I want to try to minimize the amount of airspace inside the tank so that if there is any flammable vapors still in there, there isn't as much air for it to react with. The other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to take some dry ice and drop it in here. And what the dry ice is going to do for me is introduce an inert gas in here. You can see how if I hold my hand over the end here, now what I've got is this is carbon dioxide coming out. So it's displacing all of any and all flammable gases that might be in here. There's a couple ways you can do this. This to me is probably one of the easiest. You could, and probably the cheapest, you could take and plumb in an inert air line like nitrogen or argon or helium if you want to spend the money. Another kind of old school farmer trick that I've heard of and I've never really seen is that they'll take the exhaust off of a tractor and run it into the tank so that the tank is then filled with carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide, not dioxide, and that helps to disperse any flammable gases that are in there. This is probably overkill for a diesel fuel tank. But I want to do everything I can to make it as safe as possible and increase my odds of success as much as I can. So I'm going to run and grab my welding gear because I just realized I left it out in my car. And then we're going to get this thing hopefully welded up without too many issues. All right, so I may have overdone it on the dry ice the last time. I kind of pretty much just dumped the rest of it in there because I wanted to make sure that I was going to have good gas coverage the whole time. And it's still bubbling away in there. I'm sure that water's, it's not too cold now. So anyway, now I just looks like it welded up just fine. One benefit of the water in there is it also acts like a heat dam. And then that's why I had this chunk of aluminum up here. because that will help soak up the heat there, and it keeps the top of the rest of the aluminum from getting too hot and warping or expanding too much, and getting some warpage in there. So it just acts as a heat block or a heat dam to kind of help soak up some of the heat. Looks like it welded up okay. I had to go back here just a little bit and cut it back out and hit it again. There was a little bit of contamination in there. Probably would have been just fine if I'd have left it, but I just decided to cut it out and redo it. Not too bad. I got a little impatient and really didn't have myself and how I would run the pass set up as much as I should have to make it as nice as possible, but it came out okay. I have no idea if it's going to crack again. I feel like my weld that I did is better than this stuff. This looks like some very fast moving pulse welding. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know how this thing was made, but anyway, we'll get it, let it stop percolating. We'll get the water dumped out of it, get it as dried out as we can, make sure there's no debris or dirt in there. We'll get it put back together and put back in the Bronco. All right, fuel cell is all back in, welded up. Fortunately from this side you can't really see the weld seam because it's on the other side up against the tubes. Everything went back in just the way it's supposed to. It's all tightened down. It doesn't feel like there's any pressure on the top of that tank, so I'm not quite sure if it was just a manufacturer's issue with the way it was welded. I guess we'll find out. If it cracks again, then we know there's some other sort of an issue going on here. Anyway, went back in. There's no fuel in it yet. I gotta take my gas can, run to the store and get some fuel before we can drive it. Hopefully there's enough in the fuel filter still that I don't have to reprime everything, and it'll just be able to stumble its way through a little bit of air in the system. All right, so that's going to do it for this episode of Fabrication 101. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hopefully I can start getting a few more videos out. I'm still pretty busy with school and the way things are going. This was not a planned video. It just so happened that it cracked the other day after I got done messing with all the getting the injectors all taken care of. I'm still waiting on a few things for the engine. I still have to put in a boost gauge and a pyrometer, which I'm pretty excited about because I got the stuff to tie them into my Dakota digital gauge. I'm just waiting on those parts to come in for that. Unfortunately, it means I'm going to have to pull the exhaust manifold off to drill and tap that for the pyrometer probe. But anyway, hopefully got some exciting stuff coming up for you guys. I got a big project coming up that I'm kind of keeping a secret for a little while, but eventually you guys will find out what it is. So once again, you guys, thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you're liking this stuff, if you know somebody who you think might like it, send them this video, send them a link, share it with them. Comment down below what you think of this project, what you think of my Bronco. Make sure you like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. And we will see you guys in the next episode of Fabrication 101. In the meantime, do me a favor, do yourself a favor, and go build something.